Thank you for joining me for this special early Juneteenth release of an episode that would normally drop on a Friday. Since today is a federal holiday and many of you have the day off, I wanted to make this episode available to you when you have time to listen. Juneteenth is obviously about freedom, but it's also about family and opportunity. That's what this episode embodies. As an aside, if you want to learn about Juneteenth from a first-person perspective from people who were there, I recommend picking up a copy of my first book, The Eyes of Texans. It's available on Amazon. That's The Eyes of Texans. Now, please enjoy this episode with my guest, Dante Wright.
On today's edition of Stories from Real Life with Melvin E. Edwards, our guest for this episode is attorney Dante Wright. Dante is a man whose story sounds like something out of a movie, but it's 100% real. He is a criminal defense attorney, speaker, and author of the upcoming memoir, The Judge and the Juvenile. At just 4 years old, Dante was living in poverty when a chance encounter with a judge, literally in the street, changed the entire course of his life. That judge would later become his mentor, adoptive mother, and eventually his law firm partner.
Amazing time of my life. It was very unexpected. It happened by it's complete chance the way it happened. I met her just by going into the street, chasing my brother who took my bicycle. That's really how I met her. And she happened to be driving home from work at the same time. And I always say if she had come by a few seconds later or earlier, we'd never meet. Maybe I'd never become a lawyer. Maybe her and I don't have this law firm now. So much actually happened in that small amount of time when her and I met. And you just never can predict stuff like that.
Let's join the inspirational conversation with Dante Wright.
You are listening to Stories from Real Life, a podcast by engaging storytellers for engaged story listeners. Here's your host, author and journalist, Melvin E. Edwards.
Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Thanks for joining me for the podcast where personal stories can have a global impact. As you heard in the intro, our guest today is the author of the upcoming book, The Judge and the Juvenile, attorney Dante Wright. Dante, how are things going over there in Virginia?
Things here are good. I'm assuming, are you in Texas, Melvin?
I am in Texas, yes.
Okay, I see the Houston Astros, the Eyes of Texans. A lot of Texas pride going on there.
Well, you can't even see the other walls.
What you got? Yeah, San Antonio Spurs.
I've got a Texas. I'm from Houston, so I've got Houston. Okay. I've got a Texas flag, but I have a whole Astros wall there.
Wow.
A couple of Texas items on that wall. Bunch of Texas books, including my two books. These two are my books.
That's cool, man. Oh, these are your books?
Yes.
Right here on the wall? Wow, okay.
Yeah, The Eyes of Texans was the first one, and that's my mother's side of the family.
Okay.
And The Strength of a Thousand Sons follows my dad's side of the family.
I got to read that. That sounds great, man. Okay.
I'll send you the links.
I can find them on Amazon?
They are on Amazon. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. I
appreciate your interest.
Please. Thanks. Yeah, that's cool. I like to read those. But things here in Virginia are good. Probably not that different than what's happening in Texas. I don't know. I've been to Houston one time.
Just one time.
Yeah.
My son lives in Virginia, too.
Your son lives there?
Mm-hmm. He lives in Northern Virginia.
Manassas, Fairfax, Arlington?
He lives in, I can't think of the town, near Manassas. Near Manassas.
Okay. Did he go to school there in that area?
He went to school in Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania, okay.
We lived in Annapolis for a long time. He went to college in Pennsylvania and then got a job in Virginia. He's been there for the last 5 years.
Nice. Well, that's a really good
mechanical
area,
engineer.
Especially like contracting and government work and cybersecurity is really big in that area.
Yeah, he's a mechanical engineer and he loves his job there.
He's a smart man. He's
yes.
He's a smart guy. He's a smart guy. He's an engineer.
Yep. So are you as an attorney? I'm really interested in hearing your story.
Yeah, man. Well, thank you for having me. Yeah, let's jump into it. I will follow you.
Let's do it. Okay. So my first question today, do you think your initial interaction with Judge Poindexter was a divine appointment?
So At the age of 4, I would definitely not know that. But as I reflected when I got older, certainly. I mean, without question, just that one moment that was so unpredictable. And I think maybe even more so for her, if I could say that, because you don't think that after you reach the age of, I believe she was 50 when her and I met, 50, 52, something like that. And, at that point, she already had been a lawyer for 20 plus years. And she went from being an attorney to being a sitting judge. And so she had all of this success already. Once you get to a certain spot in your career, you win a couple championships, you feel like you're pretty solidified. You feel good. So you never suspect that you can meet somebody, especially a 4-year-old child, who could eventually be another chapter to your story. And maybe you have your second coming, like your Michael Jordan coming back for the second three-peat. You can't really predict these things. And so, of course, to me, it was an amazing time of my life. It was very unexpected. It happened by complete chance the way it happened. I met her just by going into the street, chasing my brother who took my bicycle. That's really how I met her. And she happened to be driving home from work at the same time. And I always say if she had come by a few seconds later or earlier, we'd never meet. Maybe I'd never become a lawyer. Maybe her and I don't have this law firm now. So much actually happened in that small amount of time when her and I met. And you just never can predict stuff like that. So, definitely a turning point in my life.
It's an amazing story. I can't wait for my listeners to hear it. So, by the way, have you thanked your brother for taking your bike that day? Oh, none of this would have happened if he hadn't taken your bike in the first place.
You are absolutely right, Melvin. You know what? He and I have spoken about it a number of times. And, he says, I was just taking your bike. I was picking on you like I always did. You got big brothers that pick on you. And so he didn't think anything of it. And I didn't think anything of it. You are your kid and you chase your brother into the street because you want back what you believe belongs to you, my bicycle. I wanted my bicycle back. And that's the way it happened. It's so funny, though. It's just really funny how it happened.
It is. So take us back to that moment in 1997 when your life changed forever.
Yeah. So at that time, I was living in the household with my mom. My mom is originally from Brooklyn, New York. And she came from a pretty big family, from what I understand. I never met many of them. And she was one of a number of children. By the time she moved to Virginia, it may have been in 92 or so, the year before I was born, she had 6 kids already. And she met my dad when she moved here. And then she got pregnant with me. And I was born in 93. And I was child number 7 before she was even 30 years of age. She was 29 when she had me. So she had 7 kids at that point. And she hadn't finished high school. My dad hadn't finished high school. Just a regular, hardworking Black woman who was trying to make a way for her kids. And she was a very good mom, a sweet mom. Didn't have any issues as far as like addiction, nothing like that. But just didn't have any support. Just, really was by herself and trying to understand the dynamics of being a 29-year-old mother with 7 kids. And of course, that's almost impossible for anybody without any support. So that's where I was at that point. And I was just outside hanging out with my older brother. He was maybe 8 at the time. I was 4. And I think my other siblings were either in the house playing video games or doing whatever they were doing. And we happened just to be outside by ourselves. And we're both riding our bicycles. And he decides he's going to take my bicycle and go out into the street. And I decided to give chase and I follow him out there. And at that point, this vehicle is approaching us almost at the same exact moment that we're in this street. And I recall it so vividly. She gets out of the car and she puts us back into the yard and she parks her car. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we are in trouble now. We're in trouble. She's going to walk into this household and tell our mom that we were out here in the street and we're going to be in some big trouble at this point. So she goes and talks to my mom. And, as a kid, I think time doesn't really register to you because I felt like almost in the next moment, she just reappeared with like this halo above her head. And she comes back at some point, probably within the next couple of weeks or so. I don't know the exact date she comes back. And she went out and she bought this huge van that could fit all 7 kids. And
Wow.
then she began taking us to the swimming pool and to Boy Scouts and bowling and skating. And we got to have all these experiences that my mother just couldn't afford to give us. And it was amazing. And that's really how it started, her and I's relationship. And a lot of stuff happened in between meeting her and before I moved in with her when I was 15. But that's really how it started. And that was that moment for me. And I recall that moment so vividly. So vividly. I don't know why I do. And maybe it makes sense now why I do, but that's how her and I met.
That's an amazing story. So how long were you in foster care?
Well, see, I got kind of lucky, Melvin, because when I got removed from my mom's house, initially I went to live with my paternal grandmother, and she was a very sweet woman. I think I lived there for maybe 2 or 3 years. And then she fell ill and she couldn't take care of me anymore. So I had to move. I moved in with a cousin at that point, and I stayed there. I stayed with her for several years, but, we lived in just very impoverished neighborhoods. We lived in trailer parks. We lived in project housing, and, we didn't have a whole lot. It was a very, very rough go. And then at some point, when that stopped working out because she just couldn't financially afford to, and maybe even emotionally afford to take care of me anymore, really, I wasn't her responsibility. She was doing it out of the kindness of her heart. And at that point, I move out and I go to live with my father for a couple of years. And we tried that, and he tried his best. But he already had several other kids, and he was struggling, and he had things going on. And so that didn't work out. And then I found myself at a point where I was pretty much on the cusp of going to a group home, and the judge found out, and she talked to her husband, and they said, well, we're not going to let him go to a group home. If he's 15 at this point, he's probably not going to be adopted. He'll age out in the group home. He'll be put out into the street when he's 18. He'll have no direction. He'll have no support system. He'll have nobody to look out for him and be in his corner. So we got to step in and help him out. Otherwise, he may fall into the system and we'll never see him again.
I don't sense any resentment at all in your voice.
None.
You had a lot of different turns in your story, and none of them were working out until you got to Judge Poindexter.
That's correct. Yeah. No resentment. Melvin, I always say that, and maybe it's because I turned out this way. I'm not resentful. I would hope that even if I were not this person, I would still be somewhat appreciative of what was done for me. Because the fact of the matter is, I think tribulations are really designed to define who we are. And if you can make your way through those things and you understand that you have to experience hardship to actually be someone that is of substance and of value to this world. No one that has a completely paved road or an easy path, those people rarely get to impact the world. And so in my mind, I should be pretty grateful that I had it tough coming up to a degree. And people have tougher lives than me. So, I was not taken advantage of as a child, thank God. And I had food. I had a house or a roof over my head. We didn't have a lot of money, but I was never without food. I was always nourished. So, you can't ask for much more than that. And people did care about me. And despite the fact that some things didn't work out for the best or for the better, it kind of did work out because I am who I am now.
Well, you graduated from law school in 2018.
Yes, sir.
At what point between meeting Judge Poindexter in 1997 and your law school graduation did you realize that you might have what it takes to become a lawyer?
So it took me up until after my first year in law school to really convince myself that I knew what I was doing. And the reason behind that is nobody went to college in my family, right? That wasn't even a thing. So even getting to college to me was kind of a miracle to a degree. I did well in high school, but people can do well in school and things can always happen. And then for whatever reason, it doesn't work out. So getting to college was a phenomenal thing. And I did well in college. And once I was in my senior year, I said, well, I'm going to take the LSAT, see what happens. If I get a decent score, then I will apply to college or law school and I'll see what happens. And so I applied to law school. I got into a number of different law schools, thankfully. And when I go down to North Carolina Central for my first year, we had this orientation that's called Law School 101. And it was like the first week of law school to kind of ingratiate you to the culture of law school. So you're prepared to withstand the demands of the classes, the curriculum, the rigor, all of these things. And during this Law School 101 orientation, they drill it into your mind that a third of you all are not going to make it past your first year. And so I kept hearing that. And I said, okay, Dante, this is probably where you finally tap out. This is where you ultimately get exposed, because you really shouldn't be here. You don't have any of the foundational pedigree that would put you here. So I get to the first year, and lo and behold, we lose a third of our class. We lost about 60 out of 180 people. Almost to a T is about a third of the class. But I did well the first year. Didn't struggle, did well academically. And so now I started saying, well, yeah, maybe you actually are kind of smart. Like, maybe you do know what you're doing. And maybe it's not a facade. And it took about that long for me to really believe in it, Melvin. That was 2016 after my first year in law school.
Okay. Is there a particular class that was sort of the dividing line between those students who made it and the ones who didn't?
There were a couple of them, actually. Yeah. So first year, I think most students in law school tend to struggle with contract law. And we think, contracts, that's, a few sheets of paper with some words on it, and you kind of read through it and you figure it out. There is so much more to it than even what I understood. There are so many different laws and clauses that can all affect the contract. So that's one that people tend to struggle with. And also property law. Property, as we know it, is this car belongs to me. This house belongs to me. I pay taxes on these cars and these houses and whatnot, but it's so much more complicated than that. I mean, it is far more complicated. It's so dense. There's so much context to it. And so those two classes, I would say your first year you struggle with. People understand criminal law to a degree. You can watch some of these television shows and, crime victims unit, CSU or C, whatever they call those things. So, that's kind of universal to a degree. You watch TV shows, you understand criminal law, you can kind of figure that out. But there are so many peculiar topics in law school that you have to come across and try to make sense of, that you can find yourself lost in the weeds. So probably contracts and property for first year students are likely the most difficult topics to grasp.
Okay. The reason I asked that is because there was a similar experience with my son in engineering school. They told them about a third of them wouldn't make it past the first year. And that class was calculus.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I can imagine. Oh my gosh.
So, and he had a small school, and they only admitted 55 engineering students per year.
55 per year.
55. And only 26 of those made it through and graduated on schedule.
That's brutal.
He happened to be one. He happened to be one of
brutal. That is brutal.
And they had 4 years of calculus.
Oh my! So it's not just 1 year.
It's not just one. No. Yeah, he almost quit several times along the way, but he made it through. Man. He pushed through, and he was fine at the end. And he's doing great now.
That's fantastic. He made it through. Listen, he's one of the special ones.
He made it through. He made it through. So do you feel like, you said your first year, you sort of felt like you didn't know if you belonged, if you had what it would take. Do you feel like you have to prove yourself in society to other people that you're a qualified attorney?
Not anymore. No, not anymore. I did when I first got into litigation and criminal law, because I was a fish out of the water and I had no idea what I was doing. I had never done any trials whatsoever, and everything just seemed to move 1,000 miles per hour in the courtroom. And so, I liken it to someone who is a professional sports player or professional boxer. Like, maybe if you're a boxer, in your first couple matches, the punches seem to be coming at you 20 at a time. But then as you get a little bit of experience beneath your belt, you learn the rope-a-dope like Muhammad Ali. If you learn the Philly shell like Floyd Mayweather, the punches start to kind of slow down, and okay, I see that one coming. I can dodge that one at this point. So after a while, it began to slow down, and I felt very, very comfortable with litigation and being a criminal defense attorney. But at first, I definitely felt like I had to prove myself, because I didn't know what I was doing. I was completely lost in the courtroom.
So what inspired you to become a criminal defense attorney?
So Judge Poindexter, she was a prosecutor before she became an actual judge. And the kind of person that she is, and you can tell most of who she is from kind of her and our story, she was always a very fair, loving, giving person. And as a prosecutor, she was not someone who tried to completely debilitate people, She was someone who really tried to give people a second chance and tried to figure out, what can I do to help them? And also draw that fine line where you just can't help certain people. Certain things just have to be done if certain crimes are committed. And so I knew that's how she got her start. And her and I talked about it when it was my time to kind of come up and see what I could get myself involved in. And there was an opening in an office where she knew the boss. And she said, hey, I have a son who's a licensed attorney. He just passed the bar exam here in Virginia. Do you have any openings? And he said, yeah, send him over. Let's see what he can do. And it went from there. And so I was reluctant to do it at first because I thought that I'll be working with her immediately after passing the bar exam. But she was not yet there where she felt comfortable enough to take me beneath her wing. And she said, well, you should go get some trial experience first. And if you can make it through that, then we can have a conversation and we'll see what happens. So that's how I got to criminal law. I did prosecution for about 3 years beneath two great people, Vincent Robinson and Regina Sykes. They're fantastic lawyers. And they taught me everything that I know about trial law and criminal defense or prosecution at that point. So that's how I got my start.
All right. Before you sort of got a stable foundation with Judge Poindexter when you were 15, what were your early years like growing up in poverty and without any consistent guidance?
Well, I'll say that there was a lot of anger, feelings of abandonment when I was younger, because you question whether or not you are someone that is sufficient enough to even be loved. You wonder whether it's your fault. Like, why don't my parents actually come around a whole lot more? Mm-hmm. Why aren't they as involved in my life? And so your self-confidence takes a large hit to it. And so either you can allow it to be that way or you have to build yourself up through your own accolades. And I just chose to be someone who just cared so much about school, who cared about academics. And I just threw myself into academics. I threw myself into sports. And I never had a problem making friends. I always had great friends around me. I always had, a lot of good people as far as my friend groups went. But the earlier years, you question who you are and you start to ask yourself, it's like, well, what am I doing wrong? And what can I do better? And then you say, well, if I make this grade in this class, it'll change how they feel about me. It'll change their desire to be around me and maybe somebody will actually come back and take me back into the home. Or if I do well in this particular sport, maybe I'll then get that attention that I've been craving as a child. But that's not what ever happened, and luckily I did very, very well personally, when I was in grade school, and it just built my self-confidence and to the point where I felt like, okay, well, even if I don't have anybody at all supporting me, I have enough emotional security where I can now go out into the world and try to attack things by myself. But initially, definitely feelings of abandonment and insecurity and all that kind of stuff that comes along with that. And, then you're also living in poverty. You don't have a lot of money, so you can't buy all the nicest things that other kids have. And you can't do everything other kids do. Kids are talking about going on vacations with families, and you don't really understand that. It doesn't make any sense to you. You never heard the word vacation unless you read about it in a book or, a dictionary. So that just wasn't my reality. My reality was a lot different than that. And it was a whole lot of just trying to convince myself that I was adequate to a degree.
That's a heavy burden for a young man to carry. I'm sorry you had to carry that. That's too much for anybody to have to deal with. So do you go on nice vacations now?
I do. I do. My fiance and I, we really enjoy just getting away sometimes. And Judge Poindexter and her family, we do a New Year's, a post-Christmas into the New Year vacation every year. So, we've gone out of the country several times together, and it's always good. It's always great, man. I don't look back at those past memories as being painful. I now see them as being things that really shape me as a person. So I don't have any bitterness towards it whatsoever. I don't have any anger towards it. I've long since gotten beyond that when I was a teenager, and I'm really grateful for it. And now I can really enjoy what a vacation means when I go on one and hang out with some good people and just have a good time.
That sounds great. So how did your relationship with Judge Poindexter evolve from your chance encounter to a mentorship to eventually becoming law partners?
Right. So I wish you could talk to her or meet her. I mean, she would love to get up here, I'm sure. But she is someone she's 80 years old now, and she still works. She'll go to court for cases still. And she enjoys the practice of law. She enjoys getting up and just still feeling the thrill of what it means to be an attorney. And she's just someone who has worked so hard and who has accomplished so much in life. And she still has this desire and this love for it. So someone like that, you got to really prove yourself to. Now, she never put pressure on me to do anything. She never said, well, I'm not going to work with you unless you do this. She never did that. Never did that. But with someone who works that much and who still loves the career that much and the profession that much, they're not just going to accept the fact that you say you want to become something and be something without having any POC, any proof of concept. So the evolution, I believe, occurred at different stages. And the first stage was when I finished law school in 2018 and I took the bar exam in DC, District of Columbia, and I passed that one on the first time. So that's one level of respect. But that still only puts me as an attorney in DC and the surrounding areas that accept that DC license, not in Virginia. So when I came back to Virginia in 2020, the Virginia bar was looking me right in the face. And to stay here and practice law, I had to pass now the second bar exam that is known to be one of the top 3 to 5 most difficult bar exams. And so I'm staring down the barrel of this exam and I say, okay, well, if I pass this one, I'm going to stay here in Virginia. If I don't pass, I'll leave and go back to where I'm licensed and I'll just keep practicing there. So I take and pass the Virginia bar, which is now my second bar exam I passed on the first attempt. And so now I'm licensed here in Virginia. So of course, the respect level increases significantly. Oh my gosh, she's now here too. And then I go and I become a prosecutor like she used to be. And I get my experience as a prosecutor and I start doing criminal trials and et cetera. And she starts to hear rumblings from her old colleagues that this child is in the courtroom and I understand that he's your son and he's very well spoken. He presents very well and people like him. He knows what he's talking about. He seems to be a very smart young man. So now, that level of respect is increasing a lot more. And then I say, hey, listen, I'm going to step away from this office and open my own office. Do you want to join me? And I think at that point, because I had done so much to prove myself, she was all for it. So it took a lot of work, but I never did it really just for her. A large part of it was to prove to myself that I was who I believed I was, because you can't do things for anybody else. You can keep them in mind as you're doing them, but you have to prove it to yourself first. And as you prove it to yourself, perhaps they see proof by extension of what you're doing. So that's how that worked.
Okay. And you're a criminal defense attorney, as we mentioned earlier. What's something most people don't understand about the criminal justice system, and how does that work? How does your work aim to change that?
Well, I think most people believe that it is a very linear process where A plus B must somehow equal C, 1 plus 1 has to equal 2. And that's just not how the system works, at least not here in Virginia. 1 + 1 could equal 2A, 2B, 2C, 2D, 2E. It can mean a lot of different things, and it's not linear. So in the sense of when you are putting on a case, or I'm defending somebody that's a client, and there's evidence that comes out, every piece of evidence can't be given to the court. Some things aren't allowed in, some things are allowed in. And you have to be very methodical about how you argue certain things to get certain points across. So that way the court hears certain things and it helps prove or disprove the other person's case. So it's a very, very subjective type of practice where you can't just go look it up online and figure out all the answers. I mean, it is so, again, it's such a dense topic, and it's such a vast area of law, criminal defense law. Because there are so many different codes you have to abide by. You got to prove certain elements to prove a case. And then if somebody has a plausible defense to the alleged crime, you got to explore that now, whether that defense is an adequate defense. And there's just so much to it. It's so much to it. But it is fun. It is fun. So that's probably what people don't understand. It's not as black and white as you would like to think it is. It's a lot of shades of gray inside of it.
Okay. That's really interesting. So what role has faith played in helping you overcome adversity and staying focused on your mission?
So it has played a role that even I could not have predicted, Melvin, because I take you back to when I was a younger guy again, and I told you about how I had all these questions of whether I was adequate and whatnot. And if I put myself back into those shoes, the young Dante was someone who completely questioned whether or not there was even this being that existed. And the reason behind it, again, is because you're too young to understand that the battles have to be given to the very, very capable warriors. At that point, you think, well, if there's such a thing as a God that is supposed to love a person like me, then why am I constantly given every single hardship that I could even think about? And so you don't really understand that perhaps this is part of the journey. So that way you can go from here to here and become who now stands before you. Because if he gave me an easier journey or the easiest journey, then you lack appreciation for who you are. And then maybe you think that, okay, well, I got here by doing it the easy way. I took the shortcut. So the shortcut now becomes your dedicated path of choice, and you avoid every other path, even though the other path is the path that you should travel, but that path requires a lot more. And maybe on that path, you got to walk across shards of glass. Maybe you cut your feet, but you don't lose your foot. You still got your feet, but you got to make it through that. And then we start thinking that, okay, well, the easiest path where I can wear my Nikes and I'm stepping over sand and grass and nothing is even penetrating the soles of the shoes, that is the easiest path. And that's not what you're meant for. And so I had to adopt that mindset because I used to question whether or not there was even this being when I was younger. And when I got older, I said, well, Dante, this is all part of what had to happen to you. This is all part of it. We all have the ability to really overcome things and get through things. And I think that is God trying to show us who we can really become if we choose to embrace the struggle and not shy away from it. And so it has played a major role in who I am today because I questioned it before and because it is unquestionable now.
So how did you start that process of rewriting your own identity to become somebody who's now building a legacy for yourself?
So for me, it really all started with academics. I really cared about being someone that if I had to look in the mirror, I could say, you know what, you're a competent person. You're a competent person. And if you are put into certain rooms of certain people, you can have a conversation with them about a number of topics. You're competent, you're well studied. And because I did so well in school, that helped a whole lot. Before I finished high school, I had about 30 plus college credits. I really went to work, and we had this program in my school where you can get all these credits and stuff. And so I took it very seriously. And then when I got to college, I joined organizations, I joined a fraternity, I got very social, still did well academically, and I just kept going from there. I really prided myself on being a person who was academically inclined, socially inclined, and socially and culturally aware. That's really kind of where I started. And that's how I began to rebuild my own identity and my own self-esteem. And so, once you get there, once you have emotional stability and you have this foundation that's kind of unshakable and you know who you are, you don't require a lot of external affirmation anymore. You require it from yourself and also from whoever your God is, and then you're pretty much good to go.
So what do you say to young men who feel like their past disqualifies them from the kind of success that you've experienced?
You know what? I have addressed this before a number of times, Melvin, when I've been giving speeches. And this very question almost put in the exact same way I've heard a number of times. And what I always say is anybody that understands, let's say someone who's an alcoholic, for example, and they go to AA, the people that are there as their guides are former members or former people that were going through the same 12-step program, whatever the program is, right? Whether it's alcohol or gambling or anything or narcotics, whatever it is, the people that have gone through it are now your tour guides. Your past qualifies you to help the next person. You see, I can't go to AA and say, hey guys, this is how you get through this program. I've never been an alcoholic. So who am I to look down on someone who has been in that position and who is now trying to help the next person? Your past never disqualifies you. It qualifies you to help the next person. And if you see it as a qualifier, not a disqualifier, you realize there is so much power in removing that first part of the word. Not disqualifier, remove the DIS, qualifier. It is a qualifier for you to help the next person. And so that's the way I view that.
So as in the opening, I talked about your upcoming memoir, The Judge and the Juvenile. But what can readers expect when that book is released?
So the book is still in the works right now. I'm getting along with it pretty well. I'm getting pretty far with it. And I have some people helping me out with all of the writing and the interviewing and stuff. So it's going pretty well. What I want to communicate with that is not supposed to be really a book primarily about myself and Judge Poindexter. It's supposed to almost be a reflection of who you can become if you choose to embrace life as it is and you choose to accept things that have been done to you or that's happened to you as being things that qualify you for your eventual success. Because it does not matter what's happened to you in the past as long as you utilize it for fuel to push you further along in life. So that's the primary reason behind the book. It's not supposed to be just hey, this is who I am, look at me type of thing. It's more so, man, look at what you can also do. Like, have you ever stopped and thought about the fact that perhaps you also have all this potential inside of you, all this greatness inside of you? Have you chosen to ignore that? Because most of us ignore it. We know it's there. We can feel it, but we don't explore it because we're afraid that maybe it'll be too much work. And maybe trying to extract my potential will require things of me that I don't want to actually go back and tap into. Because you got to tap into your past trauma, tap into things that have happened to you, and you have to figure out, okay, am I willing to go to that place to find that person who's sitting there in the corner saying, hey, listen, give me your hand. It's time to leave this place. And now we're going here because you don't belong here anymore. It's time for us to move on and become who we can actually become. So that's the purpose of the book.
You make me want to run through the wall. You should be a football coach or baseball coach. So what are your future plans? So
I am happily engaged. So I'll be getting married in December.
Congratulations.
So that's the most important thing. Thank you. That's the most important thing. And I'm just here just helping people out. I do defense work in my area and I'm growing the law firm, hiring some more people to come work. So that's going well. But, that's my career and I have a passion for it because it makes me an advocate for people. But I'm also really passionate about just speaking to people and going around and talking to folks. And I would like to continue doing that. And, whatever that means, if that means people have me come speak to an audience, or I go into a school system and help them with a program that is a nonprofit, whatever that means, my goal is to be useful, be valuable, and be available to people. That's my entire goal, in whatever capacity that means that. So we'll see what happens.
Well, I don't want to tell you which direction to go, but it seems like you got a future in politics.
People say that, and I always say that I don't want to. I don't want to.
It's tough. It is tough. I've never been an elected official, but I was a speechwriter for some elected officials here in Texas.
Were you?
Including the governor for a long time ago.
Get out of here, really?
In Texas. Yeah.
Get out of here. Wow.
Yeah. But after about 5 years, I decided I don't like seeing the behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah, that's my concern, because I know that you can likely effectuate change at that level, but to me, it almost feels like it's so high level. You're more of a figurehead and you're less boots on the ground. And, I just like being a lawyer. A lawyer that has me in the courtroom, I have to make an argument for my client on their behalf. Like, that's as close as it gets. And if I go out to the community and I start just kind of working my way around and talking to people and helping out, I'm on the ground. And I don't want to be relegated to just talking to people through a screen or on a stage and not actually be there making an impact. So I have been approached several times about the opportunity to do things like that. And I just always say no. I say, listen, I'm 31, maybe when I'm 50, if that's a path that I should take, but only if I know that I can still do it the way I want to do it. I don't want to sit behind a desk and take phone calls and that be the end of the story. I got to be out there. I got to see people, talk to people, understand their problems, talk about whatever I can do to help them, if I can help them. And if I can't do that, I don't want to do it. I just don't want to do it if I can't do that. I don't see any real purpose in me doing it if I can't do it.
That makes a lot of sense. And I don't know you. I'm not your father, but I'm going to offer you some advice. Just do go where your heart tells you to go, and keep doing what you're doing. You're an inspiration. So, as a last question today, is there any inspiration or anything you'd like to leave as a matter of advice for the listeners?
Yeah, I always say, Melvin, that quite often the thing that we fear the most is what we should lean into. And in today's time, I think we are fighting a lot of internal battles, and we're trying to figure out where do we fit in this world. And that's very difficult for people, because as you have this internal strife that's occurring, people often decide to shy away from what they should be doing because they're really afraid of the battle to a degree. But the battle, it really is certain. Whether it's an internal battle or it's external, the battle really can't be avoided. And I think people would do well by saying, you know what, I need to attack myself to a degree so that way I can understand my own downfalls, my pitfalls, my weaknesses. And now I can begin to develop some type of a plan to address these things, because you have to really embrace these. It has to be embraced. There is a battle either way, whether it's going to be inside, internal, with yourself, with somebody else, with the world, but to constantly live day by day, knowing that you have more to give and to not at least make the attempt to do it is a disservice to yourself, to your family, to your faith, and to the world, really. And it doesn't mean that you have to always succeed. Like, people will see, oh, this has happened for you and this has happened in your life and it's been success. There have been so many failures that only people on the inside would know about. You question yourself a whole lot. I question myself a lot. I still do sometimes, because you don't know whether or not, all right, am I making the best choice? You just do your best. But if you make the attempt, it's not a failure. The failure is not making the attempt. That's really the failure. And so I say, figure out how you can attack whatever your weaknesses are, embrace the battle that you have within or on the outside, and make the attempt. Make the attempt. If you don't finish, if your goal is to write a book and you only get one chapter done this year, That is one more chapter than whatever you had before. If your goal is to run a marathon and you get there and you run 10 miles, you ran 10 miles, but at least make the attempt. Don't do the thought attempt and just think about doing it. Get up, get your body in motion, make the attempt, put the effort in, and to see where you land, and then reassess and try again.
That's good advice. Good advice for everybody. So our guest today has been attorney Dante Wright. Dante, thank you so much for being here. It's been an honor to speak to you today.
Oh, been an honor to talk to you too, Melvin. Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Yes, absolutely. So please go to my website at podcastreallife.com for more information about my guests and the things we discussed today. That's it for today's episode of Stories from Real Life. Join us again next time for another chance to learn from each other. Until then, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Stories from Real Life. Don't forget to subscribe and share. Let's meet right here every Tuesday and Friday. See you then.